There are places where childhood is measured not in school books or playground games, but in the lessons learned on streets that never sleep and neighborhoods that demand toughness as a survival skill. In 1970s Glasgow, one such place was Blackhill, a housing estate where the lines between safety and danger were blurred, where sectarian divisions carved invisible boundaries, and where the rise of razor gangs cast long shadows over the lives of everyone who called it home. It was in this environment that Paul Ferris grew up, a boy who would learn early that survival required observation, adaptability, and a reputation that could both protect and intimidate. Every corner, every alleyway, every exchange held lessons, some subtle, some stark, about who could be trusted, how power moved, and what it meant to assert oneself in a world defined by fear and respect. For Ferris, these streets were both classroom and crucible, shaping the instincts, strategy, and resilience that would later define his life. Paul Ferris's early years were marked by a duality common to children growing up in Glasgow's toughest estates: the need to navigate ordinary life while also understanding the unspoken rules of the streets. Families in Blackhill faced economic hardship, limited opportunities, and social pressures that few outside the city could fully appreciate. Schools provided structure, but the most enduring lessons were often learned in moments of observation, in conversations that carried warning beneath casual tones, and in watching older boys negotiate power and status. In such an environment, Paul quickly understood that influence was as valuable as respect, and that perception often outweighed reality when it came to survival. Even as a boy, Ferris demonstrated an acute awareness of social dynamics. He observed the hierarchies of local gangs, noted the personalities who commanded attention, and learned the subtle cues that distinguished strength from weakness. These observations were not academic exercises. They were practical tools for navigating a community where missteps could lead to long-term consequences. By understanding the motivations of those around him, and by learning to anticipate reactions before they occurred, Ferris began to cultivate a skill set that combined psychological insight with practical street knowledge. Family life and local culture also played a crucial role. Growing up in a working-class environment, Ferris was immersed in narratives of loyalty, resilience, and territorial pride. Celebrations, local gatherings, and community interactions all reinforced a sense of identity that was inseparable from place. Within this framework, Ferris's emerging understanding of authority and control was shaped as much by observation of adults as by experience with peers. He learned that influence could be earned in multiple ways: through direct action, strategic alliances, or careful negotiation, and that credibility mattered above all else. Education in Blackhill, both formal and informal, reflected the realities of the estate. Schools taught reading and arithmetic, but the broader curriculum of life included reading people, assessing risk, and understanding the patterns of local power. Ferris excelled in this environment because he paid attention to nuance and detail. He noticed how conversations shifted when certain names were mentioned, how alliances formed and dissolved, and how small decisions could have outsized consequences. These early lessons in observation and strategy would later become defining features of his approach to life and crime. The influence of peers cannot be understated. Growing up in an area where gangs and youth groups intersected with daily life, Ferris experienced firsthand the pressures of conformity, competition, and loyalty. Friendships were often tested by local allegiances, and understanding when to act, when to speak, and when to step back was essential.
Ferris's ability to navigate these relationships early on laid the foundation for his later skill in managing networks of loyalty and influence. He learned that respect was earned as much through perception as through action, and that patience often yielded more power than impulsive decisions. Blackhill, like many Glasgow estates at the time, was defined by its physical and social architecture. Narrow streets, communal spaces, and interwoven housing blocks created natural arenas for observation and engagement. Every route to school, every shortcut, every local shop offered opportunities to learn about patterns of movement, social behavior, and territorial boundaries. For Ferris, these physical spaces were also mental maps, each corner and corridor storing lessons about strategy, influence, and the subtle art of navigating a neighborhood where reputation could protect or expose you. Sectarianism also shaped daily life. Ferris grew up in a community where historical divisions influenced interactions, friendships, and conflicts. These divisions required heightened awareness and adaptability. Understanding which interactions were safe, which were symbolic, and which carried potential risk became a critical skill. Ferris internalized these lessons early, recognizing that survival depended not only on personal ability, but on the ability to read the environment accurately and respond with discretion. By the time he reached adolescence, Ferris had acquired a nuanced understanding of power, reputation, and influence that many adults struggled to master. He recognized the importance of signaling strength without unnecessary provocation, of observing patterns before acting, and of maintaining credibility among peers. These lessons were reinforced daily by both success and misstep, and each experience added to his emerging identity as someone capable of navigating the complexities of the Blackhill streets with intelligence and strategy. In essence, the early life of Paul Ferris in 1970s Glasgow was defined by immersion in a microcosm of challenge, adaptation, and learning. Every interaction, observation, and decision contributed to a skill set that would later define his criminal career. From the gray streets of Blackhill to the broader underworld of Glasgow, the foundations of his reputation, intelligence, awareness, and the ability to command respect were laid in these formative years. Ferris's story reminds us that even in environments defined by hardship and tension, individuals can develop extraordinary insight into human behavior, strategy, and survival, setting the stage for a life that would captivate, alarm, and intrigue the public for decades to come.
As Paul Ferris grew older, the lessons learned on the streets of Blackhill began to take shape in more structured and deliberate ways. By his mid-teens, he was no longer simply a boy observing the dynamics around him. He had become an active participant in the social hierarchies that defined Glasgow's criminal underworld. The transition from observer to enforcer was subtle at first, a favor done for a local gang member here, a message delivered there. But each action carried weight, demonstrating reliability, courage, and crucially, discretion. Ferris understood that influence in these networks was earned gradually through consistent performance, reputation, and the perception that one could be trusted with responsibility in high-stakes situations. He quickly became known for his ability to handle difficult assignments with a calm and calculated demeanor. Whereas some younger members of the local gangs relied on bravado or impulsive displays of toughness, Ferris emphasized strategy. He assessed situations before acting, understood the personalities involved, and learned how to achieve objectives while minimizing unnecessary exposure. This combination of intelligence and street smarts made him an invaluable asset, and it was this very skill that earned him the role of enforcer. In that position, he was entrusted with maintaining order, ensuring compliance, and projecting the authority of the gang in the most effective ways possible.
Ferris's rise was also facilitated by his understanding of loyalty and alliance. He recognized that trust was a currency in the underworld, one that could be spent, lost, or cultivated. Building a reputation as someone reliable, consistent, and capable allowed him to navigate increasingly complex relationships with older, more experienced criminals. He was careful to align himself with individuals whose influence could extend his reach, while avoiding those whose instability could threaten his growing authority. These strategic alliances allowed Ferris not only to survive, but to thrive, positioning himself as a figure whose judgment was respected and whose decisions carried weight. The environment of Glasgow's criminal underworld in the late 1970s and 1980s was one of constant negotiation. Territorial disputes, rivalries, and feuds required leaders and enforcers to be adaptable, resilient, and precise in their decision-making. Ferris's approach combined observation, intelligence, and timing. He understood that being feared was not solely a matter of aggression, but of predictability and control. Those who relied solely on intimidation often faltered, but Ferris's ability to anticipate reactions, assess risk, and execute plans efficiently set him apart. Fear, in his case, was rooted in competence and reliability as much as in reputation. Part of Ferris's effectiveness also stemmed from his capacity to blend discretion with visibility. While his actions were often decisive, he understood the importance of managing perception. Operating with subtlety, ensuring that messages were conveyed indirectly when needed, and maintaining the appearance of calm control allowed him to influence events without unnecessarily attracting attention from law enforcement or rival groups. This balance between action and strategy was a hallmark of his tenure as an enforcer, and it distinguished him from others who relied solely on force or reputation. By taking on the role of enforcer, Ferris gained an intimate understanding of the operational structures of Glasgow's criminal networks. He learned how information flowed, how disputes were resolved, and how decisions at higher levels impacted street-level activity. He became a bridge between leadership and foot soldiers, capable of interpreting orders, enforcing discipline, and reporting back on developments with precision. This position gave him insight into both the mechanics and psychology of organized crime, a knowledge base that would serve him well in the years to come. Ferris's activities as an enforcer were not limited to the streets. He became involved in coordinating logistics, managing communications, and overseeing the enforcement of rules within the gangs. He understood that influence required not only visible action, but also behind-the-scenes coordination. Whether mediating disputes, ensuring compliance, or assessing risk, his role demanded analytical thinking and a strong sense of timing. In each instance, he applied the same careful observation and strategic planning that had guided his early development, reinforcing his growing reputation as a capable and reliable operator. As his reputation solidified, Ferris began to be viewed as a figure whose presence could stabilize volatile situations. Leaders and peers recognized that his involvement in disputes, enforcement, or negotiations often prevented escalation. His combination of tactical intelligence, understanding of human behavior, and capacity for controlled decisiveness allowed him to exercise influence in ways that extended beyond mere intimidation. This nuanced approach earned him respect, not only from allies, but also from cautious rivals who recognized his ability to navigate the treacherous dynamics of Glasgow's criminal landscape. Throughout this period, Ferris's identity as an enforcer was closely linked to his personal code. While operating within the criminal underworld, he maintained a set of principles regarding loyalty, responsibility, and discretion. Breaking trust, acting recklessly, or failing to assess risk carefully was not only dangerous, it was incompatible with the role he had cultivated. His adherence to this code reinforced his authority, as others learned that dealing with Ferris meant engaging with someone consistent, predictable in competence, and deliberate in action. The role of enforcer also demanded constant vigilance. Ferris was aware that his position carried inherent risks. Rivalry, betrayal, and law enforcement attention were constant threats. To navigate this environment successfully, he cultivated situational awareness, maintained strategic alliances, and observed patterns that others overlooked. His ability to anticipate moves, understand the motivations of various actors, and plan accordingly allowed him to exercise control even in tense or uncertain situations. This vigilance became a defining feature of his professional life and contributed significantly to his enduring reputation in Glasgow's underworld. By the time Ferris reached the height of his role as an enforcer, he had transformed from a boy learning survival lessons on Blackhill's streets into a central figure within Glasgow's criminal hierarchy. His rise was not accidental. It was the product of intelligence, observation, strategic thinking, and an unerring understanding of the balance between fear and respect. The skills he developed during these formative years, tactical awareness, social intelligence, loyalty management, and disciplined decisiveness, enabled him to navigate a world defined by volatility and to command influence in ways that were both subtle and formidable. Ultimately, Ferris's tenure as an enforcer demonstrates how reputation, strategy, and discipline can shape influence in an environment governed by informal authority. Fear alone is temporary. Respect, rooted in competence, endures. Ferris's life in this period was a masterclass in navigating complexity, asserting control, and understanding the subtle dynamics that govern human behavior in high-stakes environments. The lessons learned during his rise as an enforcer would continue to inform his actions, decisions, and the legacy that made him one of Glasgow's most notorious and fascinating figures.
As Paul Ferris solidified his role as an enforcer, his influence naturally expanded beyond immediate street-level operations into the wider criminal networks of Glasgow. By this stage, he was no longer simply responding to situations or enforcing orders. He was actively shaping outcomes, navigating alliances, and understanding the intricate web of relationships that underpinned the city's underworld. Glasgow in the late 1970s and 1980s was a complex ecosystem of competing gangs, sectarian divisions, and territorial claims, and Ferris's intelligence and discretion allowed him to operate successfully within this environment, gaining access to opportunities that others could only observe from the periphery. Ferris's transition from enforcer to influential figure involved a careful combination of strategy, timing, and social acuity. He learned that criminal operations were as much about negotiation and communication as they were about enforcement. Understanding when to act decisively, when to assert authority, and when to step back required not only street smarts but also psychological insight. Ferris became adept at reading people, recognizing fear, ambition, and loyalty in subtle cues, and using that understanding to influence outcomes in his favor. His reputation for measured judgment began to precede him, ensuring that both allies and rivals weighed his involvement carefully. The expansion of Ferris's criminal activities was gradual but deliberate. He moved beyond immediate enforcement tasks into areas involving coordination of operations, oversight of illicit transactions, and management of disputes between factions. By overseeing these activities, Ferris gained a holistic understanding of the underworld's mechanics, how resources flowed, how alliances shifted, and how conflicts could be resolved or exploited. This strategic perspective allowed him to exercise influence without necessarily being the most visible figure in every confrontation. His ability to operate effectively behind the scenes added another layer to his reputation, enhancing both respect and fear in equal measure. During this period, Ferris also became increasingly aware of the need to maintain a public image that balanced intimidation with subtlety.
While he did not shy away from asserting authority, he understood that overt displays of aggression could attract unwanted attention from law enforcement or rival factions. Instead, he cultivated a persona that combined calm confidence with a hint of unpredictability. This approach made him appear capable of decisive action while remaining difficult to anticipate, a combination that amplified his influence and made him a key figure in resolving or controlling volatile situations. Ferris's growing involvement in the wider underworld also required a nuanced understanding of risk management. Each decision carried the potential for significant consequences, whether legal, personal, or organizational. He developed the ability to weigh outcomes, anticipate reactions, and adjust strategies in real time. This skill allowed him to navigate high-stakes scenarios that would have overwhelmed less experienced operators. In a world where mistakes could be costly, Ferris's disciplined approach set him apart, ensuring that he remained not only relevant but indispensable to the networks he operated within. Relationships played a central role in Ferris's rise. He recognized that influence depended on loyalty, trust, and mutual benefit. By building strategic alliances, he positioned himself as both a mediator and a power broker within Glasgow's criminal landscape. These alliances were rarely static. They required ongoing management, negotiation, and careful attention to shifting dynamics. Ferris's ability to maintain these connections while asserting his own authority allowed him to extend his influence across multiple factions, often mediating disputes before they escalated into broader conflicts. At the same time, Ferris's reputation began to attract scrutiny from law enforcement. Police operations in Glasgow were increasingly focused on organized crime, and Ferris's growing prominence placed him under observation. Yet his skill in operating discreetly, managing information, and maintaining a controlled public persona allowed him to navigate this scrutiny with remarkable effectiveness. He understood that perception was as important as action. Being perceived as competent, cautious, and influential could act as both a shield and a tool, deterring rivals while complicating efforts by authorities to predict his behavior. Ferris also developed a keen sense of timing, understanding when to act overtly and when to operate behind the scenes. This strategic patience enabled him to build leverage, gather intelligence, and position himself advantageously before engaging in visible activity. By controlling the pace and visibility of his involvement, Ferris maximized his impact while minimizing exposure, a skill that further enhanced his standing within Glasgow's criminal networks. The consolidation of Ferris's influence was also facilitated by his adaptability. He recognized that the criminal landscape was not static. Alliances shifted, rivalries evolved, and law enforcement strategies changed. His ability to adjust his methods, reassess relationships, and respond to emerging threats ensured that his authority remained relevant. Ferris's adaptability was not reckless. It was grounded in careful observation and strategic calculation, allowing him to maintain control even as the environment around him became increasingly complex and unpredictable. Throughout this period, Ferris's growing power was intertwined with his understanding of human behavior. He recognized that fear and respect could be cultivated through consistency, reliability, and reputation as much as through direct action. Individuals within the network learned that Ferris's involvement in a dispute or operation signaled both competence and strategic awareness. This perception allowed him to exert influence without always engaging directly, creating a dynamic where his authority extended beyond physical presence or immediate action. Ferris's criminal career at this stage also reflects the interplay between operational skill and symbolic authority. He was simultaneously a doer and a figure whose reputation shaped behavior. People adjusted their actions based on the expectation of his involvement, demonstrating how influence can be as much about perception as direct engagement. This dual role allowed Ferris to navigate situations that would have been unmanageable for others, reinforcing his position within the Glasgow underworld. By consolidating his influence in these ways, Ferris positioned himself not merely as an enforcer or participant, but as a central figure capable of shaping outcomes, managing alliances, and controlling the flow of events within Glasgow's criminal networks. His rise illustrates how strategic thinking, observation, relationship management, and reputation can combine to create authority that is both resilient and adaptive. In an environment defined by volatility and competition, Ferris's approach allowed him to extend his reach, maintain credibility, and exercise control in ways that few others could match. Ultimately, Paul Ferris's expansion into wider criminal activities demonstrates the transformation from a street-level enforcer into a figure whose influence spanned multiple layers of Glasgow's underworld. His ability to combine tactical intelligence, social insight, and strategic patience enabled him to navigate complex networks, mediate disputes, and maintain authority under constant pressure. This period solidified his legacy as one of the city's most formidable and fascinating figures, a man whose reputation, skill, and understanding of human dynamics allowed him to operate at the intersection of fear, respect, and strategic influence.
As Paul Ferris's influence grew within Glasgow's criminal underworld, his interactions with law enforcement became increasingly frequent and complex. He was no longer simply a street-level enforcer or a behind-the-scenes power broker. He had become a figure whose actions drew sustained attention from police, investigative journalists, and intelligence networks. The authorities recognized that Ferris was not only operationally capable, but also highly strategic, making him a challenging subject to monitor, predict, and contain. This attention introduced a new layer of pressure, one that required careful navigation and an acute understanding of risk, timing, and perception. Ferris quickly learned that law enforcement attention operated differently from the street dynamics he was accustomed to. While criminal networks relied on reputation, alliances, and influence, authorities relied on surveillance, intelligence gathering, and legal mechanisms. Each interaction with the police was a test of composure, judgment, and adaptability. He had to maintain a persona that was both cautious and confident, projecting strength while avoiding missteps that could lead to arrest or conviction. This duality, balancing operational effectiveness with legal awareness, became a defining feature of his criminal career. Surveillance was a constant factor. Police monitored communications, tracked movements, and observed interactions with other gang members. Investigators sought patterns, trying to anticipate his next move. Ferris understood that missteps could be exploited, so he developed strategies to manage visibility, control information, and maintain operational discretion. Even routine activities were approached with care. Who was present, what was said, and how actions could be interpreted were all assessed and planned. This level of awareness was not born of paranoia alone. It was a practical adaptation to the realities of a high-profile criminal life. Encounters with law enforcement were not always confrontational. Ferris often relied on understanding procedural boundaries, knowing when to assert rights, and leveraging ambiguity to avoid unnecessary exposure. By carefully navigating legal and procedural frameworks, he was able to mitigate risk while continuing to operate within the networks he influenced. This approach demonstrated a sophistication beyond mere street-level cunning. It was a strategic engagement with the institutions designed to control and contain him. At the same time, Ferris had to manage perception within his own networks. Visibility to law enforcement could undermine credibility or provoke rival factions, so he balanced caution with demonstrations of authority. Actions were calculated to maintain respect and influence, while also signaling prudence. This careful calibration of behavior reinforced his reputation as someone both powerful and intelligent, a figure whose presence shaped events without requiring constant physical involvement.
Encounters with the police also highlighted the tension between operational freedom and vulnerability. While Ferris had skill in managing day-to-day risks, sustained attention from law enforcement imposed structural constraints. Certain movements, communications, and transactions were no longer purely tactical choices. They carried potential legal consequences. This required him to prioritize, assess, and sequence actions in ways that aligned both with strategic objectives and with minimizing exposure. It was a constant negotiation between opportunity and threat. Ferris's legal encounters were complemented by intelligence assessments that extended beyond immediate criminal investigations. Authorities attempted to map networks, understand alliances, and predict potential flashpoints. Ferris responded by enhancing operational security, using trusted intermediaries, and maintaining layers of separation between himself and sensitive activities. His ability to anticipate investigative priorities and adapt behavior accordingly demonstrated a nuanced understanding of both human behavior and institutional processes. One of the most striking aspects of this period was Ferris's capacity to operate under pressure without allowing external scrutiny to compromise internal influence. He continued to coordinate activities, manage relationships, and shape outcomes within the criminal networks even as law enforcement focus intensified. This ability to maintain operational control in an environment of constant observation reflected both his intelligence and his discipline. It also reinforced his status as a figure whose authority was not merely physical but psychological, extending influence through reputation, decision-making, and strategic foresight. Ferris's experiences with law enforcement also underscored the interplay between risk, visibility, and reputation. Being highly visible made him a target, yet it also amplified his authority. He had to navigate the paradox of needing to demonstrate capability while avoiding overexposure that could be exploited. This delicate balance became a defining feature of his approach, combining confidence with discretion and ensuring that his decisions were both impactful and sustainable. Throughout this period, Ferris learned that the legal system, like the criminal networks he operated within, was not purely procedural. It was influenced by perception, negotiation, and leverage. Engaging with authorities required not just compliance or avoidance, but a strategic understanding of how actions would be interpreted, reported, and acted upon. By mastering this interplay, Ferris was able to continue exercising influence and authority, even under scrutiny that would have incapacitated others. The tension between criminal influence and law enforcement attention also shaped Ferris's long-term strategies. He began to consider not only immediate objectives, but also how decisions would resonate over time, how patterns of interaction could be managed, and how reputational capital could be preserved. This foresight allowed him to remain a central figure within Glasgow's underworld while minimizing legal and operational vulnerabilities, demonstrating a rare combination of tactical agility and strategic vision. Media attention further complicated the environment. News reports, rumors, and investigative journalism amplified Ferris's profile, introducing additional scrutiny and shaping public perception. He understood that narratives created outside his control could influence both law enforcement priorities and the behavior of rival factions. By managing interactions, projecting authority, and maintaining a disciplined public persona, he mitigated the potential negative impact of media exposure, turning it instead into a tool for reinforcing reputation and influence. Ferris's dealings with law enforcement during this period illustrate the complexity of operating as a high-profile figure within a criminal ecosystem. He had to balance immediate operational needs with long-term considerations, tactical execution with strategic influence, and personal safety with reputation management. Each decision was assessed not only for its direct impact, but also for its broader implications across networks, media, and institutional attention. By the late 1980s, Ferris's ability to navigate this challenging environment solidified his standing as one of Glasgow's most formidable figures. He was respected not only for his operational effectiveness, but also for his intelligence, adaptability, and capacity to maintain influence under sustained scrutiny. The interplay between his criminal activities and law enforcement attention became a defining feature of his career, illustrating how strategic thinking, social insight, and careful management of risk could allow an individual to thrive even in a highly monitored and volatile environment. Ultimately, Ferris's encounters with law enforcement reflect the delicate balance between authority, perception, and vulnerability in the life of a high-profile criminal. His ability to maintain influence while under observation, to manage relationships and operations with foresight, and to navigate both legal and social complexities demonstrates a level of strategic acumen that was rare within Glasgow's criminal landscape. This period cemented his reputation as a figure whose intelligence and discipline were as formidable as his operational capability, leaving a lasting impression on both the criminal underworld and the authorities who sought to contain it.
As Paul Ferris's encounters with law enforcement and his operational reach expanded, the narrative surrounding his life began to shift from fear and notoriety to public fascination. Glasgow, and indeed Scotland as a whole, became captivated not only by his criminal activities, but also by the intelligence, discipline, and strategic acumen that defined his career. What made Ferris's story compelling was the duality of his persona, a man capable of commanding influence and respect in dangerous circles, yet also someone whose life was shaped by circumstance, environment, and the choices he made in response to the challenges of growing up in Blackhill. This complexity ensured that Ferris's legacy extended beyond the underworld, capturing the imagination of writers, filmmakers, and the public at large. The rise of media interest in Ferris's life coincided with broader societal fascination with figures who operated on the margins of legality yet exhibited remarkable intelligence and presence. Documentaries, newspaper features, and later books chronicled his life in vivid detail, emphasizing not only his actions but also the psychological and strategic dimensions of his decisions. The focus on his ability to navigate complex social networks, manage risk, and maintain influence under pressure highlighted a dimension of criminal life that went beyond violence and intimidation. Ferris became a lens through which audiences could explore the structures, hierarchies, and human behavior that defined Glasgow's criminal world. Public fascination was fueled in part by the tension between his notorious reputation and the layers of strategy underpinning his actions. Unlike many figures who relied solely on aggression, Ferris's approach was deliberate, calculated, and measured. This allowed observers to see him not just as a participant in criminal activity, but as a thinker, a strategist, and a figure whose decisions reflected both intelligence and foresight. Biographies and interviews emphasized these qualities, presenting him as a man who had learned to master complex systems of influence and control while maintaining an acute awareness of risk and consequence. Ferris's story also intersected with broader cultural narratives about Glasgow, sectarian divisions, and the rise of organized crime in urban centers. His life became emblematic of a generation of young men shaped by socio-economic hardship, limited opportunity, and the pressures of navigating neighborhoods defined by both loyalty and rivalry. Through this lens, Ferris's rise and continued influence were not merely the product of individual choice, but also a reflection of the environment that had shaped him. Audiences could explore how systemic factors, poverty,
Community networks and social expectation intersected with personal intelligence and ambition to produce a figure both feared and fascinating. Books and documentaries exploring Ferris's life often emphasized the psychological and ethical dimensions of his choices. While he engaged in criminal activity, his career also reflected a careful calculation of consequences, loyalty, and perception. This approach resonated with audiences because it offered a more nuanced understanding of criminality, one that emphasized human behavior, strategy, and adaptability rather than simple stereotypes of violence. Ferris became a figure whose life could be studied for insight into decision-making, influence, and survival in extreme circumstances. Another element contributing to his lasting legacy was his ability to articulate and reflect upon his own experiences. Through interviews and later memoirs, Ferris provided perspectives that allowed the public to engage directly with his reasoning, motivations, and reflections on past actions. This transparency, whether fully candid or selectively presented, added depth to the narrative surrounding him, presenting him not just as a figure of fear, but also as someone capable of introspection and strategic self-awareness. Audiences were drawn to the tension between the man and the myth, the calculated operator and the public persona that had evolved over decades. Ferris's story also underscores the interplay between notoriety and cultural fascination. His reputation for effectiveness and strategic thinking created intrigue, while the high-profile nature of his encounters with both rivals and law enforcement amplified public interest. The fascination extended beyond Glasgow, attracting attention from wider audiences interested in the dynamics of organized crime, the psychology of influence, and the environment in which such figures emerge. In this way, Ferris's life became a case study not only in criminality, but also in social systems, human behavior, and the consequences of circumstance combined with intelligence. The enduring interest in Ferris's life also reflects society's broader curiosity about morality, consequence, and resilience. Audiences are drawn to stories that explore the boundaries between right and wrong, safety and danger, and power and vulnerability. Ferris's ability to navigate these boundaries, maintain influence, and survive in a volatile environment made him a compelling subject for examination. His experiences illustrate how personal agency interacts with social, cultural, and structural factors to produce outcomes that are both extraordinary and instructive. Ferris's public image was shaped not only by media representation, but also by his ability to manage perception. He understood the value of reputation, both within criminal networks and in the public sphere. By controlling what was visible, what was communicated, and how actions were interpreted, he influenced the narrative surrounding his life. This attention to perception allowed him to maintain authority and credibility, even as media scrutiny intensified and the mythos of his persona grew. In effect, Ferris became a figure whose influence extended into cultural and symbolic realms, reinforcing the connection between reputation, perception, and legacy. In addition to media attention, Ferris's life inspired cultural explorations of Glasgow's history, social dynamics, and criminal landscape. His experiences became a reference point for understanding the city's evolution, the impact of sectarian divisions, and the ways in which young men navigated limited opportunities and complex social networks. Ferris's life served as both a cautionary tale and a study in strategy, illustrating how personal choice, intelligence, and adaptability intersect with broader societal forces. Through this lens, his story transcended simple biography, becoming a means to explore complex social, psychological, and historical questions. Educational and analytical perspectives further reinforced Ferris's legacy. Scholars, criminologists, and historians examined his career to understand organizational dynamics, leadership under pressure, and the psychology of influence in high-stakes environments. By situating his actions within broader patterns of human behavior and social structure, these analyses provided depth to the narrative, emphasizing that Ferris's significance lay not only in his activities, but also in what his life revealed about human decision-making, strategy, and resilience. Ultimately, the legacy of Paul Ferris is multidimensional. He is remembered as a feared enforcer, a strategic thinker, and a figure whose life offers insight into the interplay of intelligence, circumstance, and environment. His story continues to resonate because it bridges the worlds of criminality, human psychology, and cultural narrative, providing audiences with a lens through which to examine both the realities of Glasgow's underworld and the broader questions of influence, survival, and legacy. By navigating complex networks, managing risk, and maintaining authority under constant pressure, Ferris left a mark not only on the city he inhabited, but also on the imagination of those who study, report, and reflect upon his life. Ferris's enduring fascination demonstrates the power of narrative, reputation, and human complexity. He is neither simplified villain nor untouchable hero. He embodies the intersection of intelligence, circumstance, and survival instinct. For Glasgow, for Scotland, and for anyone seeking to understand the mechanisms of influence in volatile environments, Paul Ferris's life remains an instructive and compelling story, a testament to the ways in which human behavior, strategy, and resilience can shape both individual destiny and the perception of an entire city.